where kind of concepts in relation to conflicts are articulated, or sort of the philosopher Adi Ophir and his lexical project of political philosophy that are kind of references to this. So this is relevant in the context of the Center of Research Architecture ongoing engagement in examining conflict as productive in the constitution and making of space, in reading political rationalities as they are inscribed in spatial products, right? I mean, what we do very often is that we are examining artifacts and seeing how they are products of various forms of relation, various forms of rationalities and systems of government and occupation, etc., and kind of try to tease out of them the kind of the politics that is folded into them. Although the occupation is a military term associated with military operation, let's say it was a forceful taking over control of territories and people, of military warfare and guerrilla resistance to it, and their respective techniques, the focus of this maybe lexical kind of approach that we offer is to look at occupation as a kind of regime. So not the kind of the moment of occupation, when it sort of thickens into a system of rule. An occupation, and you know, when you hear it from me, and Ali already had this kind of gag, obviously we think about the occupation of Palestine, parts of Palestine, the last parts of Palestine after '67, or your one, must also deals, this occupation deals with the issues of government, with the organization of collective action and the maintenance of life, the management of people and things. This government is concerned, right? The government and occupation is, and when you think about occupation as a form of government, is really very clear. No, when such actions like the British military in Iraq, the Israeli in the West Bank, Gaza, and others, Lebanon, etc., are also systems of government. They're government with arms. And this is something that is important, no? The way in which violence and the means of violence and military organization becomes, in fact, a system of rule and control. So this government is concerned with the control of population by force or by the threat of violence. Violence is always there as a kind of potentiality that makes every act, every order, every kind of act of government always against the background of a certain potential violence that could be unleashed at any moment if it is not immediately applied. It is concerned with the management of circulation of people in space, also with the circulations of goods and services, or the non-circulation, if you think of places like Gaza right now, where occupation is actually articulated by the absolute control of every flow that enters into it. I mean, you can imagine that territorial system of control, as we used to think of the Israeli occupation, say in the West Bank, that is, you know, with its settlements and checkpoints and walls, turns into an occupation that is simply an act of modulating flow through an envelope. A control and occupation that is not existing physically in the area occupied. It is the envelope itself that would modulate anything from the number of trucks, humanitarian trucks that come in. It counts the calories that would go into the area, devising it according to humanitarian minimums of 2,100 calories per adult male, 1,700 calories per woman, the calibration of the flow of electricity and fuel into it. So it is the porosity of the wall which becomes that system of government, right? The wall itself becomes a sovereign, in a sense, that it controls. There is a direct relation between the body of the Palestinian people within Gaza Strip and the porosity of the wall, what it allows through, right? And in a very kind of bureaucratic institution, border institution, is that its aims are exactly to modulate and regulate these flows into Gaza, to keep it just over the level of what the UN would call a humanitarian crisis or emergency. It's kind of calibration. When some data from the ground would point out that there is starting a certain famine in parts of the area, they would allow a little bit more calories inside that part, right? Translated to number, or very careful division of types of foods on a number of tracks in which they are raised. So an occupation that is a system of government that operates for a series of on-off valves, a differentiation between the kinds of people and kinds of goods, right? And their organization within space, and managing their respective movement and speed of movement, right? I mean, if you think of the West Bank, it is exactly that system of differentiation between perhaps 10 types of designations of different Palestinians according to different papers, some of them from Jerusalem, from Northwest Bank, from Southwest Bank, former arrested, etc., VIPs, members, and each one would circulate in space in a different speed, right? Or would be allowed entry and exit. So think about an occupation regime which is that kind of system of modulations of speeds and flows throughout kind of a thick territory. So initially there are military institutions which are formed, and we want you to think about that kind of moment after the occupation as a verb, as kind of a moment of break in time, or the invasion itself, when it becomes a system where it thickens into it. The military institution turned quasi-civilian institution, or mercenary institution that work under the military. This becoming government means that violence exists always on this gradient of less and more. Right? An occupation that becomes a military occupation, becomes a system of government, is never simply applying all the violence that it has stored, right? There's always a kind of a modulation, a certain kind of choice of less and more in the distribution of violence in relation to kind of effect that is being thought. So government, this kind of government by the affliction of harm or the threat thereof, and government by restraining and moderation. Sometimes it is exactly in the withdrawal of violence or in the allowance to allow humanitarian aid to arrive, to improve here and there conditions that become part of the system of control that occupation, the system of government and occupation is. This is when violence starts intermeshing with benevolent action, humanitarian action. And this is where kind of all sorts of negotiations and compromise are entering into kind of the thickened politics that the occupation as a system of regime becomes. So the series of concepts will try to deal with a certain expansion of the field that occupation is. What happens after this moment of invasion? This multivalent political field that emerges, composed of NGOs from the left, from the right, mercenary groups, international agency, conflicting state agency, multiple forms of opposition and resistance to them that all together shape and reshape, constantly shape the mechanisms and the territory of occupation. So with these concepts, this seminar becomes a kind of a place perhaps to look at occupation, to offer from us to you this series of concepts from very much the margins of the world. You will hear about Amazon, Palestine, Libya, Angola, Lebanon, and from these we will try to think, from these margins we will try to think and develop whether some of those are even relevant for you here. So,